Culture Radio, keeping you informed.
Demerara and Essequibo 99.1 FM.
Berbice 99.5 FM. Culture Radio.
Looking for a new job opportunity? Let Strategic Recruitment Solutions, Inc. help you maximize your potential. Visit them at 230 Camp Street, Laceytown, Georgetown, obliquely opposite the New Citizens Bank. Strategic Recruitment Solutions. New ideas, better HR.
It is 19 hours 30 and it is time to enter room 592 this evening. At the helm of the program, Dr. Yog Mahadeo on 99.1 FM and 99.5 FM. And there he is being joined this evening by marine conservationist Annette Arjoon-Martins and marine ecologist Joe Ryan, alongside environmental economist Stephan Moonsammy and someone a familiar face to room 592, GECOM Commissioner Mr. Sase Gunraj. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Evening.
Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Kevin. How are
Good
you
evening,
tonight?
colleagues.
Good evening, one and all. And good evening to our viewers and listeners all across the country, in the Caribbean, in UK, USA, Canada, wherever you're joining us from. Good evening to you all and welcome to room 592, where we unleash the truth. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special lineup for you. And I know that you have gotten used to us getting through the kind courtesies of Mr. Gunraj to get an elections update at the bottom of the program just before we say goodnight. But tonight we want to ask Mr. Gunraj if he could kindly favor us by giving us an elections update at the top of the program so that he can get on with his work. As you know, he has been at it night and day. And Mr. Commissioner Sase Gunraj, we really appreciate you joining us on our Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, sir. And we know you're having a tough day. But as I say good night to everyone, I also would like to acknowledge the presence of the panelists to discuss Guyana's ecosystems. No other than Miss Annette Arjoon-Martins, Mr. Joe Ryan, and Stephan Moonsammy. And gentlemen and lady, kindly bear with us as we give to the nation an update on what's happening at the Artichoke Convention Center from Commissioner Sase Gunraj. Commissioner, how are you, sir? And all over to you.
Good evening, Yog. Once more, good evening to your viewers. Another long day, but not as long as I want it to be. Most of the stations, I think over 80% of the stations, concluded work before 6 o'clock this afternoon. And if you look at the hour being lost across all of the stations at the end of the day, it's almost like you've lost an entire workday when our timeliness and efficiency in relation to the overall duration of this process is being questioned by all. But some fair news, we have the 2 new workstations being opened up, slated for opening up tomorrow. And while I would have hoped that those workstations would have been assigned to, or ought to have been assigned to District 4, because what you have happening, so far there are about 1,700 and something uncounted boxes. And of those 1,700 and something, 40% or in excess of 40% is for Region 4. And as we are currently assembled, you only have 25% of the stations. 3 of 12, catering for the 2 new, 3 of 12 of those stations are only assigned to Region 4. Region 7, 8, and 9 are, if you combine the total number of boxes for those regions, you don't come up to the total outstanding for Region 4. So I believe that some degree of urgency needs to be placed on that, and it's something that we'll be raising at the Commission. That being said, we've concluded 53 boxes today as opposed to the 60 boxes that were concluded yesterday. I would only hope that this degree of efficiency that we achieved yesterday, we will be able to replicate in the coming days. But that's it. We continue again tomorrow with 12 stations instead of 10. And we're hoping to move a little quicker at that time.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. In our discussions on Elections Watch earlier today, Leonard Gildarie, who I apologize for his absence tonight, he and I discussed that with 2 additional workstations, while you said it right, it's a bit of a lukewarm progress, but it is progress nevertheless. With 2 additional workstations, we'd probably see about maybe 10 more boxes, being modest about it, to be the increased numbers per day. But Commissioner, we certainly hope that the process can go along speedily, as all of Guyana is waiting on you guys there. And it's refreshing to see that at least something is happening. I don't know if you're still there, Commissioner.
I think a call is coming in, and as a consequence,
Okay.
it's affecting it. But I'll take that as my cue to take my leave, and I'll update you as it becomes necessary.
Thank you, sir, and thank you most heartedly for joining us again and giving us an elections update. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Commissioner Sase Gunraj, who, as you know, has been kind enough to give us an update during our nightly sessions here in room 592, and we're very appreciative of him taking the time out to do that. As he updated us, there have been 2 additional workstations added. Those become effective from tomorrow morning. We do know that based on the numbers that they have been doing on a day-by-day basis, if we use some averaging, one might see probably 9 to 10 boxes additionally being done per day. It doesn't bring us to the magic figure of the 25 days in terms of the deadline, but it certainly will get us to where we want to go at a quicker pace. So we are appreciative of those small mercies and small blessings, because Guyana seemed to be having a drought where these large blessings are concerned. I think since we found oil, there hasn't been much good news thereafter. The year has become very stagnant with a lot of negatives. We've had COVID-19. We have had a discussion of what's happening with our oil and the oil prices. And then we had the second whammy hit us hard in Guyana, and that is elections 2020. So ladies and gentlemen, while all of those negative news are happening, of course, and we're all consumed, the entire Guyana, the Caribbean, the wider world, as long as you talk Guyana, everybody's consumed with elections. But while that is happening, our ecosystems, our environment, our shorelines, our animals, the fragile biodiversity, all continue to be in a greater degree of distress with each passing day, not because we are not being attentive to it, but because we are not being as rapid as we ought to be with developing policies and safeguards to take care of our environment. Ladies and gentlemen, we could have all the wealth in the world, but if getting that wealth means a decimation of our environment, it's a zero-sum game. It's a sum-zero game that will give us absolutely nothing. And tonight, we're joined by the experts in this field. We're joined by Miss Annette Arjoon-Martins. And Annette, welcome to our program. Viewers and listeners, before we allow Miss Arjoon-Martins to say hi, let me tell you, this fine lady, this very beautiful, pretty woman you see here on screen, and you're listening to tonight, she has founded the Guyana Marine Conservation Society 20 years ago, before a lot of us in this country were born. And she has played a critical role in the establishment of the Shell Beach Protected Area, which is the only coastal protected area in Guyana. She also chaired the Guyana Mangrove Restoration Program from 2010 to 2014, in which over 11 kilometers of mangroves were replanted and 40 kilometers was placed under special protection. So her interest is there. It's evidenced not just by her work and her writing and her being part of creating a more aware society, but is also evidence in nature itself. A lot of the mangroves that we are seeing that has been protected is because of her strident calls upon the authorities in Guyana and world over to pay heed to what's happening here. Annette Arjun has also, as we call her Annette, she's also been very, very proficient in her working with various communities, and her interest in community development led to the establishment of the Northwest Organics line of sustainable products which are produced by the indigenous women in Region 1. Annette also has a few distinctions that she doesn't want to talk about, and she is not comfortable with us talking, but I'll still mention it. She has the fortune, the great fortune of being regaled every day by the wonderful voice of no other than Dave Martins. Even if Dave sings to her that he loves her, he's going to do it better than any one of us can. So she is indeed privileged, and her family has stood up very strong and stands up as a good example of what Guyanese can be. Ladies and gentlemen, as we welcome Annette Arjun, let me also welcome Stephan Moonsammy, who is a doctoral candidate of the University of West Indies and a lecturer in our own university here, the University of Guyana, Faculty of Earth and Environmental Sciences. Mr. Moonsammy has a unique distinction. He specializes in environmental and natural resources economics. Now, for many of us out there, we think environment, but when you say environmental economics, it becomes somewhat as if it's paradoxical, but hear what? It is extremely important. I'm sure he is going to explain it more. But if you were to get rid, as I said at the top of the program, if you get rid of all your environment for the sake of your oil, then that's the cost of your environment, because you just spend all your revenue on your environment. And so his specialty has been in letting us know this paradigm of environmental economics and what we need to be aware of. He has also been part of many projects. I can't go through them all. His list is very long, but he is obviously very proficient. He has been part of the Caribbean Marine Invasive Project, the Guyana National Ballast Water Assessment Project, and most recently, he concluded a baseline assessment of the mangrove ecosystems in Guyana. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to welcome to our program tonight Mr. Joe Ryan, who is a marine ecologist with over 30 years of experience working in a wide range of coastal and marine management issues. And hear this, not just in Guyana, in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, and in the Indian Oceans. This gentleman has truly crossed the oceans to educate the world about the importance of the oceans and of marine life. He has led teams of over 35 multidisciplinary professionals on 2 offshore oil and gas projects. He has done a lot in terms of researching, leading teams, showing people, explaining, as he will do tonight. He also worked with EU funding. He was instrumental in that, of course, in looking at our Shell Beach protected area in Region 1 and another in Region 5. You may not know this looking at him, but he grew up nearby in oil fields in Venezuela, but he now lives in Denmark. Gentlemen and lady, it is my privilege and it's Guyana's honor to welcome the 3 of you esteemed persons to this Room 592 discussion program.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Yog.
You're welcome. And let's get right down to it. And I'm going to come first to Annette because she is most familiar to us. And I'm sure that by the end of the program, we'll be familiar with our other 2 colleagues. Annette, it has been a privilege. I've had these discussions like this with you on other programs. But if you don't mind, ma'am, walk us through a little bit of where you started, Guyana Marine Conservation Society 20 years ago, and to where you are now and your interest in this almost multidisciplinary area, not just marine conservation, but your interest is also on what's happening with our protected areas, what's happening in the interior, multidisciplinary. Your focus obviously is Guyana and its development, ma'am.
Good. So thank you, Yog. Are you hearing me okay? Very well. All right. So let me start by wishing all of our viewers happy Biodiversity Week. We're going to celebrate Biodiversity Day on Friday. So this panel could not be more timely. I also want to thank Joe and Stephan for being so very, very accommodating. I know, Joe, it's midnight in Denmark, so thank you for setting your alarm to join us. So in a nutshell, my background basically, as you may be aware, is aviation. And it was during my days of going out to Mabaruma. I used to take a very well-known scientist, Dr. Peter Pritchard, to Mabaruma every year. And I was wondering what this foreigner does coming to Guyana every year in March and going out to Shell Beach. So one year I joined him, went out on a turtle patrol, saw my first 500-pound green sea turtle. It was love at first sight, and I got hooked. I was his unofficial liaison for many years, almost 10 years, until I founded the Guyana Marine Turtle Conservation Society 20 years ago, as you said, and gave me a backhand compliment that I founded this NGO before most of Guyana was even born. But I'll take it wherever I get it. So that also led me to being given the honor of chairing the National Mangrove Restoration Program in 2010. And it was through my mangrove work that I came into contact, luckily, with Joe and Stephan. So that's basically it in a turtle shell.
Great, thank you. Thank you so very much, Annette. And let's get right into our discussion. Stephan, I would like to ask you first, because the notion that you embrace, environmental economy, it may not be something that is familiar to our viewers and listeners. And mind you, gentlemen and lady, you are presently on Facebook and YouTube, and we are also on air across Guyana via Kaito Radio. So Stephan, tell our audience, our viewers and listeners a little bit about this whole paradigm of environmental economics, sir.
All right, thank you, Dr. Yog, and good night, viewers. Well, most of us understand the dynamics of economics, and we often think that economics is about allocation of money and growth and economy growing through production and GDP and so on. But what people fail to realize is that economics is a social discipline, and it really holds on to what we value as people and the choices that we make and what we value. And the whole basis of economics is about trying to meet the needs and wants of society, given that we live in a world with finite resources. So in that understanding of economics, what we essentially do as environmental economists is that we try to understand how society values the environment. Now, the issue and challenges that we may have is a lot of people don't fully understand the worth of the environment until it's actually gone. And it's only when it's gone they realize how much of a financial burden and an economic burden it will then have once it's missing. So we as environmental economists, we try to bridge that gap of understanding that the environment is worth something to us. And in tonight's discussion, we will be basically looking at some of the most important elements of value to our society, which we call ecosystem services, right? And essentially, us as environmental economists, our main goal is to ensure that we make the right decisions when it comes to the environment. All of our production and economic activity is centered around environmental degradation. Because as soon as we start to extract and we start to produce, we're going to have resource exploitation, we're going to have pollution. So what we try to do then is try to make the right decisions in our economies functioning by ensuring we could sustain the integrity and the quality and thus the value that the environment has to the wider society.
I like that. And viewers and listeners, I think there's some terminology that we need to become very cognizant and very aware of. Environmental degradation, environmental economics, and all of those things. But let's come to Mr. Joe Ryan. I almost said Joe Biden, sir. Welcome to Guyana, even though virtually. Welcome to our shores. How are you?
Thanks. It's wonderful to be back. I can even feel the sunshine here. Shining through my screen. No, I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to come on. And Stephan gave a pretty good overview of some of the important things that we need to consider. But when I spoke with Annette, one of the ideas when she was asking me for a title of the show, what I'm very interested in is focusing the topic on the role of blue ecosystems in Guyana's green economy, because it's something that's been overlooked. Guyana is very much aware of the black mangroves that are critical for protecting the shoreline and protecting the people's crops and their lives. But there's much less known about the mangroves that are further inland on the rivers. And for me, having worked with mangroves in many countries, I see that there's something that needs to be seriously protected, because Guyana is one of the most susceptible countries in the Caribbean to sea level rise. And as the sea level rises, these mangroves are going to move with it. But if they're lost from an oil spill or from clear cutting or building facilities on the shoreline where they can never come back because they're covered with concrete, Guyana's got a serious problem for future generations. And so I would like to just bring people around thinking about more than just the black mangroves, although they're very important, and think about the mangroves that are on these rivers. Why are they important on the rivers? Well, they benefit coastal communities. They sequester carbon dioxide 4 times the amount that tropical rainforests sequester them. And Stephan will talk a little bit about some of the values. They're critical for keeping the navigation channels and the rivers open. They're nursery areas. There's a whole number of different things. And Guyana has, in a situation where they've lost over 60% of their mangroves over the last 50 years. And a recent study that was done by Global Environment Facility funding showed that Guyana only has 22,000 hectares left. But thanks to funding from the EU, from NARI, GFC, the Ministry of Infrastructure, we were able to go out to Region 1, and we found an area of these mangrove ecosystems that have got 670 square kilometers of mangroves and associated wetlands. So essentially 3 times the amount that was shown in that inventory. And I think it's time for Guyana to start considering how they're going to protect it, to make sure that they're not contaminated by oil spills, affected by the mercury that's coming from the rivers below. I could go on, but I'd like to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Joe. It's interesting, and to our viewers and listeners out there, there are so many things that you and I might not be thinking of. And as Joe rightly pointed out, the mercury coming out from the rivers, don't think about the oil spill for a minute, because probably we didn't experience that as yet. But these other leachings are happening every day. And it's having a long-term effect. You don't see it with your eyes readily, but over time you realize, hey, something isn't there. Annette, I want to come back to you. When, my brothers and even I have fond but vague memories, you even look at places like the number 63 beach and some of these places, years and years gone by, there used to be hills, high hills in all those places. Now it's all flat. It's all, just flat lands there. And, you have said, and you have called repeatedly, that there are some baseline studies that must be done, but continue to be outstanding. Tell us a little bit about these baseline studies and how important, they're important to Guyana.
All right, so thanks, Yog. And whilst Joe and Stephan is going to focus on the mangrove and the mangrove ecosystems, I just want to touch a little bit on my concern about the marine environment, and more so the marine environment in a time of oil, and first oil, that is. So when you spoke about the baselines that I'm concerned about, it's specific to the marine mammal baseline studies. So we have had like LISA 1 project since 2017, 2016. Then we had LISA 2, starting up the environmental impact assessment. And then now presently the 3rd project, PIARA, awaiting permission from the EPA. And what I've found, and I mentioned this to a friend yesterday actually, what I found from us as a Guyanese non-governmental organization doing a review of the environmental impact assessments that were produced for Exxon, it was almost like a copy and paste for each project. And it spoke volumes about the fact that what we had pointed out was essential in the LISA 1 environmental impact assessment as it relates to the marine baseline studies. We copied and pasted that in LISA 2. It still remained outstanding. We copied and pasted it in PIARA. So if we do not have, for example, a baseline study of the marine mammals that are using the space where these Exxon projects are, we could never hope to monitor the impacts of the oil operations on those marine life, much less to manage it. And this is really, really essential because, as Stephan said earlier, on touching on the environmental economics and the value of ecosystems, the tragedy for Guyana is if we do not measure what we have, we could never hope to manage it. And then more so, if we don't put a value to it, how do we know what we're losing? And if it's a direct effect of being lost because of, let's say, heaven forbid, the impacts of oil companies, then how are we talking compensation? So this is a really, really important, outstanding matter that needs the attention urgently of all of the policymakers at the highest level. The executive director of the Environmental Protection Agency, Dr. Adams, I know that he, coming from the industry himself, knows what needs to be done. And I'm hoping that before the PIARA project gets approved, these environmental deficits are corrected. And I also reached out to Joe and Stephan, who have international expertise that we don't have in Guyana, because it's time that we need to start monitoring some of these outstanding deficits and really holding both the oil companies and our government accountable.
Right. Well, thank you for that. But sorry to be a little negative here, Annette, but how confident are you that what has taken us years to do, that it can be achieved in a shorter time span going to the future?
I'm not confident at all, Yog, because the reality that I said the same thing in LISA 1 was ignored, said the same thing in LISA 2 was ignored, said the same thing for PIARA, hoping that I'll gain some traction. Right. And of course, with the whole COVID and the elections uncertainties and the reality of what lies ahead for us in an economic sense, I'm not optimistic at all. But what I could certainly tell you is I really feel that Guyana should not be looking at development at any cost, especially since it's not, it's so different for us looking at a green economy, yet we don't, all of these most basic environmental baselines are outstanding. It's just not aligned. And we need to really walk the talk of, working towards a green economy, as Joe said as well, looking at the blue economy, which is untouched. Nobody even knows what the blue economy is all about. And I'm going to ask Joe to expand on that, a bit, introduce the concept, because Guyana has done such a marvelous job of managing its terrestrial resources in the form of forests. The forest, for example, we have a golden opportunity now to do it with our marine space as well. But we have to correct these deficits that have remained for far too long in this new sector, with oil and gas especially.
Yeah, well, I did make a note to come back to Joe on the blue economy. But Joe, just before I come to you, Stephan, given what Annette just said, I know that you have, you're passionate about looking at some of these policies and decision makers because they tend to undervalue the worth of the ecosystems. You are, however, in an active education dissemination field. How do you get this done, and how do we as a nation get this done, sir? How do we get those who have to do to the space, to the spot where we can say, have done it?
Well, I mean, change is a process that is often very difficult, and it often takes the mind of the willing to make that change. And usually there are two agents of change, either through advocacy, as Annette has been so adamant about for the past 20 years, or through education, whereby, you know, we are able to enlighten and change the minds of the next generations and understanding some of the processes that goes behind the decisions that we make. And if I could just touch a bit on how we undervalue the ecosystems. Oftentimes, when we think of value, we often think of immediate financial gains. So, what is there to give us a profit, a short-term profits, and that is a misrepresentation of what true value is, right? And if we look at most ecosystems, so let's take the Shell Beach or the Region 1 mangroves, for instance, you would see that as it stands, there is no immediate financial gains compared to some sort of extractive industry like oil. So we cannot compare the revenue generation capacity of Shell Beach area or the mangroves in Region 1 to that of the Exxon explorations, right? But the value goes beyond that, because the ecosystem provides our society with a myriad of services that are crucial for our very existence. So if you look at the mangroves, for instance, mangroves are a crucial source of water purification, water regulation, draining wetlands, flood prevention, as Joe mentioned, carbon sequestration, and most importantly for Guyana, sea defense against sea level rise. So those are the services that we are undervaluing. When we see policymakers making decisions on the ecosystems, they are not considering, or we are not seeing evidence of them considering these services. And if no, we have to put what is going to cost society to replace mangroves as a sea defense mechanism, or to replace the carbon sequestration services that it provides, or the water purification services that it provides, then you'll start to see some exorbitant figures where we'll start taking a look and say, hey, maybe this action is not really the best course. We really need to think about how best could we preserve that. And that is what we really try to advocate for, and that's what we really try to educate our societies about.
Right. And I like that, because on one hand, as you rightly pointed, there is the advocacy role. And on the other hand, as you rightly pointed, again, there is the education role. And of course, on the third aspect then would be, you know, the drivers, the people who are going to drive policy change. You know, in Guyana, we have a bad word for it because of elections, lobbyists and all of that, right? The people who can influence those who make these decisions to move in certain space. Joe, before I come to you, to Annette and Stephan, both of you are intimate with the Guyana environment. And unfortunately, things that we do locally always has a whiplash. You have to be subservient to a political system. If not, you're viewed as inimical to it. We'll come to that later, because I would like to know how we can galvanize a nation, how we can galvanize Guyana through advocacy, through education. How can we get more action to now support the advocacy of yourself, Annette, and the education you were dispelling to get action taken? And so I want to come to you from the following perspective, that you mentioned a few critical things at the top of your introduction there. You know, blue economy. Annette mentioned biodiversity. We do know that Guyana has probably a good example of both. If only we can get our act right, sir. And, you know, Annette sent, you know, there have been a couple of things going around on social media of animals being put in cages and birds being, you know, all of that. So over to you. Tell us a little bit about this blue economy, biodiversity. How do we start being more careful about our environment and about the biodiversity therein, sir?
Well, the blue economy is just an outgrowth of the green economy. They go hand in hand. But like the green economy, the blue economy is not about keeping on with business as usual and then continually promoting economic growth. I was chaired a session at a conference in Kenya last year, I guess it was, on the blue economy. There were 170 countries showed up to this thing. And what I started realizing is that, it's a huge event, but it's another metaphor that's invented to take our minds off of the problems that we have. And I think until we can really put some teeth on this and measure what it means and demonstrate very clearly that we're making it, it's going to shift off to something, the same thing as integrated coastal management, which I remember starting 30 years ago, and it's worked in very few countries. So I think, number one, we need to start thinking, what is it really about? And it's, as I mentioned, it's not about growth. It's about having a closed cycle of economic development. So instead of a linear system that produces a lot of waste and has the cradle to the grave approach, this is something that is a circular, elongating the value chains so that more and more people can take advantage of it and reducing the waste. A good example, when we were talking about the baselines, it takes me back to the Deepwater Horizon. Those of you who are not familiar with it, it was a big oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. It was huge. British Petroleum had a blowout on one of their wells. But what happened is BP never did an economic valuation of the resources. So instead of having something concrete, what they're going to pay the fishermen, the tourist operators, they took things to court, and they're still arguing what the value is. So getting back to your question, Yog, is it something that you think that this government can do or the new government can do? You have to do it, or you're going to repeat history again. And if you don't start putting the values on these resources, you'll be like they're doing in Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and it even goes back to the Exxon Valdez in Alaska, which was 30 years ago, and they're still arguing in court how much they have to compensate people for.
Understood. So with regards to the biodiversity, both you and Annette, I think, we've had some situation where, even there is a story about the parrots. I don't know if one of you guys want to pick it up.
Well, just to add on to what Joe just mentioned about the analysis not being done for the Gulf of Mexico ecosystems and what happened as a result of that. What I want to say is, imagine Exxon Valdez 30 years ago or whenever, or more, Joe, wasn't it in 1989?
1989.
Yeah, exactly. And imagine if in a first world country like America with the best lawyers to represent those stakeholders, you still have unfinished business. In the Gulf of Mexico, similarly as well, if you still have litigation going on for what the compensation should be for the people who suffered as a consequence, with the best environmental lawyers there. And imagine in Guyana, where we have almost zero sort of capacity or regulations or policies to protect ourselves in terms of any sort of compensation. These are things that I think we have to wake up to, And in terms of Joe mentioned in the blue economy, Joe, that conference was in Kenya in November 2018, actually, not last year. And you are right, it's over 88,000 people from 123 countries attended. I was fortunate to be there, compliments of the Canadian High Commissioner. And indeed, I sat and listened to some of those presentations and wondered what would come out of that. But when you touched on the coastal zone management being another topic that needs to be addressed, I know that we have developed an integrated coastal zone management plan draft since 2000. Actually, the same year the Guyana Marine Conservation Society was founded, and it remains in a draft form to date. So that in itself shows you that clearly we are not serious about actually looking at coastal zone management if we have a plan that's in draft form for almost 2 decades. But I do know that there was a new integrated coastal zone management committee, I think, set up last year. And it seems to be very well thought out. So I'm hopeful that that will gain some traction and we could really get going in terms of where we need to go in terms of really looking at all of the things that need to be done in our coastal zone, offshore in the marine environment as well.
Mm-hmm. So Annette, I know this is probably an unfortunate question to be directed to you, but I'm gonna basically voice this thought, not as a question. The truth is that, you know, I'm not putting blame at the EPA because this is not something that they have to be cognizant overnight. But the truth is that, you know, Stephan, people like yourselves and Annette and so forth, you guys need a seat at the table. The advocacy groups certainly need to be at the table with the EPA, and one has to question whether, you know, any future or current permissions ought not to now be stalled until certain things are in place, until certain baseline agreements are in place, until certain understanding of how people can operate will be in place.
If I could just make a quick comment,
sure.
No, I fully agree with your sentiments, and I think that understanding where the issues and complexities arise from is a big part of the discussion and the discourse. I think one of the fundamental issues is, are we making the right decisions when it comes to policies? We can't anybody could put forward a policy, but is it the right policy? And the only way we are able to answer those fundamental questions is through the baseline information, through a research-driven, information-driven society. And that is where we have a big fundamental problem, and not just with Guyana, but I think that's a regional fundamental problem. And this is where the responsibility of the university institution, the state boards, the government agencies that can engage in allocating resources to shift our society to an information-driven society is critical. And I just want to talk a little bit too concerning the EIA related to the Exxon wells, right? Annette and Joe have mentioned several times in several other platforms of the lack of valuation work done by Exxon when it comes to their EIA. And that's a fundamental flaw if we are looking at making a decision of such an industry like that. Essentially, all EIAs should have some sort of element where we could do some benefit cost feasibility. And part of the benefit and cost to society is the environmental baseline information that is not present in that EIA. So therein lies now we are making a decision, may seem a bit rash, may seem lucrative from an immediate short-term financial gain, but is it the right decision for the country, given the context of a green economy that the country wants to go towards, which has an eco-centered, environmental-centered theme?
Mm-hmm. So, Stephan and Annette, a lot of people across Guyana, if you were to ask them, you know, what do we do about the rising coastlines? Everybody gonna say, okay, build the seawall a little higher, but you know, it's so much work needs to be done, doesn't it? Because the sentiment is that if the authorities in Guyana, as is elsewhere, cannot accept the real gravity of the situation facing us, not just through, as I said, through rising tide levels, but the entire ecosystem of Guyana. Annette, you yourself would have been part of many calls made in the past when there was all of this lack of care at the Kaichor area, the Kaichor Falls area. So it goes to a lot of, Stephan, it goes to a lot of hard work that has to be done on one hand to make the policy makers educated about what needs to happen now, but on the other hand, to make a society start to care too. I mean, I hate to say it like this, but the cavalier attitude we have about dumping water bottles and garbage all over the country, you know, that has to be curbed, and that will be a great help going forward in these projects too, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, definitely. It is unfortunate that our societies tend to be very reactive. We will really start to see the consequences, or want to take action when we start to see the consequences. So when we start to see larger issues of coastal erosion, when we start to see infrastructure being damaged, when we start to see problems in Georgetown as it relates to seawater intrusion, then is when we would want to react as a society. And I think is a major issue. The idea of the policymakers is that we need to start being proactive in these matters rather than reactive, right? And if we look at Guyana's coastal zone issue, Guyana is the one country that's part of the Caribbean region that is most vulnerable to coastal intrusion to the sea, right? Yes, we are the rest of the Caribbean islands, but we have a coastline that's below sea level, right? Mm-hmm. But here, we have ecosystems, mangrove ecosystems that provide, I would dare say, a free defense against the sea. And may not be prevent the sort of estimates that scientists have at sea level rise that will affect the coastline. It is a mechanism that can offer some level of protection, right? Right. And that is worth something.
Of course.
1 kilometer of mangrove, and Joe had mentioned we had some figures I could mention throughout in this situation. 1 kilometer of mangrove. If we have to remove that mangrove and build a seawall, it's going to cost Guyana somewhere in the vicinity between 10 million to 50 million US dollars to do so. Wow. So that is what that mangrove is providing for the country as a value. And that is why I was mentioning earlier, understanding the value that these ecosystems have can alter the way in which we make decisions that impact them.
Right. Thank you for that. Joe, I want to come back to you. Sorry.
Can I just add into briefly what Stephan said? You would recall that Minister Patterson at a public TAIN talk last year mentioned that there's about, I think, 39 kilometers of sea defenses that are in dire need of rehabilitation. And I think he said that an estimate of doing that was about almost like $18 billion. So, I mean, coming back to being aware of what we have to look at and just not burying our head in the mud flats, it's critical. Because even though while people look at, let's build higher seawalls, but then you have the mouth of the Demerara River all the way to Timeri. When you stop the water from overtopping, what are you doing about the riverbanks that, as you know, you could drive up the Craig when the river is high and the water is already coming across the road. So, I mean, this is a conversation that's really necessary and needs a whole different panel by itself for the full hour, you know?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Indeed. Joe, I want to come to you with something, because Guyana is not alone. There is obviously, you know, coastal biodiversity for the interconnected Guyanas, for, you know, many countries, and you have been across the oceans quite literally, sir. How are the other countries in the Guyanas, for example, how have they been approaching this have they been embracing it more appreciably, or is it the same as is in Guyana?
I think it's very much the same, even in the U.S. where I'm from. Denmark does a reasonable job, but most of my work are in countries who are developing economically. And most of them, they really don't understand it, especially for the reasons that Stephan has mentioned. But I think ultimately what I find, and having done this going back to the First World Coast Conference in 1991 in the Netherlands, it's been a lot of talk trying to achieve this magical thing called integrated coastal management. And what it comes down to is getting the different sectors to work in harmony with the environment. to recognize how economically valuable these systems are. And I think after all of this time around the world looking for places for success, I just ran across one. I'm evaluating a marine protected area program in all of the Atlantic funded by the EU. It's more than 350 marine protected areas, and they all have the same problems. Except I ran across something in Gabon. It's on the west coast of Africa. It's surrounded, the capital Libreville is surrounded by mangroves in 3 protected areas. And the populations were starting to move into those areas. And the Minister of Urban Development said, look, we can't do this. We have to sit down and figure out how we're going to come together and all of us harmonize our sectoral policies. And I think that's one of the things that you find in almost every country. People are working against each other. There's money being passed. There's profits to be made with the agriculture sector is always the most lucrative, the fisheries sector, and the idea is to develop instead of having a circular economy that is going to keep the profits in, going to recycle the goods and the services, and protect your investment, and let nature work for us.
Mm-hmm. But isn't it a vicious cycle that we're in? And maybe, Stephan, this is right up your alley there, because here's my point. The World Bank, the donor community, they would tend to give monies like they did in the past to help with the mangrove stuff. On the other hand, the country that benefits from the reforestation or the mangroves protection, they do nothing. And doing nothing erodes that investment away. And guess what? It's these same countries that has to take loans from the World Bank and beg the donor agencies to now do it back together. And it's a vicious tightening circle because we don't realize at the end of the day, it seems like it's coming from the donor agencies, but it's our own sweat and blood. And you're right, Stephan, you better do it right now, because the cost of losing it is so much greater and you got to pay 2-3 times worse, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. I think, we live in a world, economic world full of something called offsets. And, even in the developed world send donor funds to the developing world. And most of the times that is to offset their own environmental costs, right? I mean, we've seen schemes now from China and the US and Norway where they pay for the forested ecosystems, and that is because these countries are some of the highest carbon emitters in the world. So even the concept of seeking funding through donors it has to be a bit quick. We have to be cautious about that. The idea is that, and it is a fundamental philosophy that the Guyana is for Guyanese, all right? And it's not, I'm not taking away from the potential of international collaboration. But the mindset that we have for our ecosystem has to be a priority for the country first. And if we don't, as a society, collectively take actions to preserve our environments, to preserve our ecosystems, then it is only us to bear that loss. When we face the calamity of ecosystem collapses, when we face the calamity of coastal degradation or sea level rise as a result of ecosystems on the coast being destroyed, the donor countries will help, but the country itself is going to face the burden. And it now takes the collective action of the country to understand that.
Annette, you were going to say something.
Yeah, just to come to the defense of poor old Guyana and even the EU. For example, when the whole mangrove restoration project was birthed in 2009, the government of Guyana did provide over $100 million initially to start the program. And even when the EU funds came in the form of a grant and was expanded, at the end of that, the government did continue the mangrove program. And we have a mangrove secretariat that is managed by an amazing young woman called Keen Mosley. and they're trying their best with the limited resources they are given in these times where, you know, there's demands for everything. So I do know as well too, in terms of what the EU is looking at the moment, in terms of the next set of EDF funds, they're looking at how do we really realign the best use of those resources as well too. And I want to applaud that they do see the value in the soft defenses of the mangroves. And of course, that is what brought Joe to Guyana last year when I met him. He was doing some work. And Joe, you might want to touch on that.
Yeah. Sure. Joe,
so I think something very important is that the EU, with the grant that they gave Guyana, has planted some seeds. And now it's up to the government to take these seeds and nourish it and watch it grow. And I think if I could just ask Stephan to give some of the figures that he calculated with the blue carbon potential just in this 670 square kilometer mangrove protected area that we're hoping is going to be declared. It's an area that we calculate that there's between 15 and 20 jaguars living inside of it. Those jaguars have a huge tourism potential. There's pharmaceuticals products that we don't even know about. And ANNETTE has come up with some of them in other areas in Region 1. But, you know, it would be such a shame to lose this. You know, as Joni Mitchell sang years ago, you don't miss paradise until it's gone. Correct. And now you have a chance with this help that the EU has given Guyana.
Indeed. Well, that has been quite refreshing. Stephan, you were going to give some of the numbers?
Yes. I think definitely the initiatives by the EU and being able to have the sort of baseline assessments for Region 1, which we recently conducted, it really, as Joe said, has planted the seeds, and now it's up for the country to grow these seeds and nourish it. And when we look at some of the values that we see just for this specially protected area in Region 1, we see something in the worth of $8 billion in total economic value for that specially protected area, right? And Joe mentioned about the blue carbon potential of it. And our values estimated at around $700 million annually in blue carbon potential. And we look at the potential of tourism, which could be around between $10 to $14 million. And these values are based on estimates from surrounding areas with similar ecosystems and similar activities. Essentially, what calculation we use is that the total value per hectare of mangrove estimates around $200,000 annually as an economic worth to the country.
Interesting, very interesting. Annette, do you remain optimistic that we can galvanize more action as may be needed to coming back to the baseline studies and the baseline policies that has to be put in place? Are you confident that that this will happen sooner rather than later, ma'am?
Yog, to answer that very simply, it will be when I see what the EPA has in writing as conditional to the Payara project being granted their environmental permit. If that environmental permit does not have all of those conditionalities of having those baselines being done, well, then I will tell you that it will be a very sad day for me personally and for Guyana. So I cannot, fib and say that I sit here tonight confident that this could happen. I would say that I know that Dr. Adams is aware of what needs to be done. We have given him reams of reports from myself, from Conservation International, WWF. We collectively reviewed the EIA and gave our feedback. And it's now to see that feedback actually taken on board. So maybe when that happens, we can have a follow-up panel. I would love to have some of the representatives from the agencies with us as well, because it's always important to hear the voices of the guys who are doing a lot of hard work as well. And I know that some of the people who were on the Environmental Advisory Board would have also gone through our feedback. and hopefully in their recommendations as well to the EPA, that will be a second layer of requesting that these baselines be done. And finally, I think that, really and truly, we need to develop a new, attitude towards the environment, where I would want to see these oil companies doing what is right for the environment, simply because it's the right thing to do, not because they're mandated to do it. So don't tell me about you providing $60 million every year to forests in the middle of Guyana or the south of Guyana, when the environment you're operating is offshore and you haven't done even a single marine mammal baseline. I want you to really focus your environmental work in the area in which you operate and give us the tools to be able to monitor your impacts and to manage them. And let us manage them with you. Let us form a true partnership. So I would want to say that, let's look at a clean slate. If the companies are willing to do the right thing, this would be a good time to start, a fresh start all around.
That's right. That's right. Certainly. And to you both, gentlemen and lady, it has been quite an interesting discussion. As we get down to wrapping up our show, I'm going to certainly, have your last say. To our viewers and listeners out there, it has been a very interesting discussion. I'm sorry that we have not been able to amplify many of the concerns that we would have wanted to amplify. It is something that we'll have to discuss over and over. And I did make a commitment to the three of you. I'll say this, Annette knows this already, but Joe and Stephan, I've made a commitment to Annette that once a month, we are going to open room 592 to having a discussion on matters of the environment, environmental policies, and it is right, we can bring the authorities in to talk to them. But really and truly, I'm going to look at Annette to take the lead and guiding me and guiding all of Guyana here. The advocacy group will certainly have a seat at this table, Annette, in room 592 at least once a month. We hope to do this until we can get the traction we need in Guyana. Gentlemen, lady, it's been quite a pleasure to have you on board, and I'm going to go around to you for your final comments. To our University of Guyana professor first, Stephan Moonsammy, doctorate, who is presently undertaking his doctorate degree at the University of West Indies. Sir, it's been a pleasure to have you, but your final words and what you're looking forward for.
Thank you, Merritt. I really look forward to having more of these discussions and conversations on a national level. I think that, driving the importance of valuing ecosystems and understanding how our ecosystems contribute to our society, going beyond the extractive financial gains, but to understand the long-term sustainability context of it. The reality is that worldwide we're speaking about sustainable development, and intricate to that is the process of integrating our ecosystems into development. And we need to start taking these right steps. And yes, the country may be in a state where we have fell behind the ball in doing so, but it's never too late. Once they have people like Annette and Joe, who's constantly here to support and to constantly help develop the capacity of persons in understanding this process, then we are never too late. It's just about now the right persons, the policy makers, the decision makers being able to take the necessary actions and mobilize the resources and the intelligence of the society in achieving a purely integrated society with our ecosystems.
Correct. Thank you. And certainly, Stephan, that can be done, providing that as a Guyanese nation, we can all band together in this effort and support it in one way or another. And to our viewers and listeners, it's not a call for your financial support. It's a call for your moral support. It's a call for you, your body, your person, your family to get behind such a good action. Joe, it's been a pleasure to have you all the way from Denmark, sir. I know that we have kept you way past your bedtime, but I do know that you certainly hold this discussion so close to your heart that it really didn't matter to your sleep, sir.
I want to thank everybody, and I look forward to coming back. I think Stephan said wrapped it up so well. you know, the only thing I would hope is that the government can see the value, the new government can see the values that Stephan is talking about and expand it, and realize that now is the time to invest in strong institutions like NARI, like the Guyana Forestry Commission. You know, these are the people who are out there doing this work with very little compensation. And now I think it's a time to reconsider. And I think those values that we've come up with for Region 1 need to be expanded around the country. I think it's critical. And I think that's going to get a lot of people's attention and hopefully get some policies that are harmonized and working in a circular fashion instead of a linear economic fashion. So good luck. And I hope to be there when all this corona dies down a little bit.
We look forward.
Stay safe.
Thank you. And Joe, thank you, and our best regards to the family. I know you would be envious of our warm weather here. So until you come, we will send you the warm fire telephone, WhatsApp, and so forth.
Great. I'll take it.
You stay safe too, and our best regards to the family.
Yeah.
Annette, I want to say to you, before I give you to say the final word, Annette, thank you for pushing me too. I know that your calls have been strident, and I respect that. But certainly, Annette, we are behind you. We are going to back you and Stephan and Joe and the Environment Agency in Guyana to ensure that we can get it right one day sooner rather than later. Annette, your final thoughts.
Good. So the good news is you're aware that I have two panelists lined up for the next show. And just to mention to the viewers, we're looking at having the second Monday in every month to be the environmental panel. And both ladies for the next talk have worked with Joe and Stephan and their team. So it'll be like continuing what we started. I want to end on a funny note where about a week ago, I posted a photograph of a decomposing melon-headed whale that had washed up on Shell Beach, and which we had to get some external help to identify. And we always talk about Guyana and Guyana becoming an educated nation. What I would like to see is Guyana becoming an environmentally educated nation as well. Because whilst I posted that melon-headed whale to let people know that we had this particular species in our coastal waters, even though it came ashore dead, only the good Lord knows how the comments section went completely political. So, I mean, I think we need to really depoliticize the environment. The environment is everybody's business. When there's overtopping, the waves don't come and destroy red houses and spare greens. When there's, some sort of flood in terms of the conservancy breach or whatever, it affects all of us. So we really need to take the political lenses off where the environment is concerned and focus on the environment really being everyone's business. So I want to thank you guys, Stephan and Joe as well, and Yog, you for being so gracious and accommodating us, and wishing everybody a good night and stay safe.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you. And viewers and listeners, let me thank you for joining us tonight all across Guyana, the Caribbean, and of course our diaspora brothers and sisters in New York. Let me thank you all. Indeed, it's been a pleasure to talk a little bit, even though I wish it could have been longer, about our marine ecosystems, the entire Guyana ecosystems. And just so that you know, remember that this week is Biodiversity Week. I think Friday is World Biodiversity Day. And let us pay some heed and care for the environment. As I say in every program, give a thought, give a prayer for Guyana and its health. And also this week, be a little conscious about our environment, the animals that need our care, the waters, the seas, and all of that. And don't throw your garbage out there. Keep them and dispose of them in a right way. And ladies and gentlemen all across Guyana, it's been a pleasure to have you here. Let me say that I miss Mr. Leonard Gildarie, our co-host, who's unable to join us tonight. But thanks to him, thanks to Kevin Smith, Josh, and of course, Glenn Lal for making this program available to you and all. This is a gratis, free work that we are all doing together just to ensure that Guyana remains informed and that we're all driving the same, singing from the same hymn, same him page all the time when we talk about Guyana. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Stephan, Joe, Annette, thank you all very much. Do have a safe night. God bless you all. Bye-bye now.
Thank you very much.